Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Just Kitchen, Invitations to Sustainability, Cooking, Connection, and Celebration, by Derrick, Weston, and Woofenden. Narrated by Bill Andrew Quinn and Mcnamara. Introduction. Reimagining Our Kitchens. There are a lot of books about food. Walk into your local bookstore and you will find food histories, anthropological studies of food, scientific studies of what you should eat and why, and of course any number of diet books and cookbooks. We, Derrick and Anna, have read a lot of these books, and as the co-hosts, along with our friend Sam Chamberlain of the Food and Faith podcast, we often get to speak with the chefs, writers, and activists who wrote them. But as we surveyed the landscape of what is written about food, we began to notice something missing. There's an important growing number of books about the brokenness of the food system, particularly the extractive ways most of our food is produced. Other books focus on eating, usually highlighting the joys and benefits of slowing down and eating together in community. But what we only rarely saw were books focusing on where much of our time is actually spent, between food being produced and food being served, between the corn growing in the field and the grilled corn hitting the table. There's just not much written about the kitchen and cooking itself, particularly from the lens of faith and justice. Oh, there are a lot of cookbooks, but there aren't a lot of books about cooking. We want to have this book in the world because what happens in our kitchens takes a significant amount of our time, resources, and energy. We want to talk about these things because, whether we recognize it or not, we put a lot of who we are and much of what we value into our cooking. And we believe that what happens in our kitchens matters. We are not chefs. We are not food scholars. We are not culinary historians. We are two people who love talking about food and the spiritual connection to it, and we are two people who are committed to asking questions. During the run of the Food and Faith podcast, we have asked our guests and ourselves questions you may have as well, such as, where does the food we bring into our kitchens come from? Is it equitably accessed? If so, how? Could it be sourced more equitably? How does that food and how we prepare it help form community at the table? More than 100 guests from across the human spectrum have shared their stories with us and with listeners, allowing us to glimpse their lives and kitchen stories and how they speak to the intersection of food and faith in their own experience. In the following sections, we bring some of those stories and questions to our kitchens and yours, that same interrogative lens and attention to lived experience as we contemplate what happens in our kitchen spaces. We asked our friends, interviewees, and colleagues who care about food and about doing good in the world what is happening in their kitchens. We talked to professionals in the food industry, but not many because we want to keep the focus on what real people are doing to bring their values into their homes. We talk to historians and people who know about the larger food system to bring a sense of context. But mostly we talk to people who like to cook and who spend a lot of time in their kitchen. We also talk to a few people who don't like to cook but have to anyway to learn valuable insights about time constraints and busy households and how all of that relates to their kitchens. We asked, how does food shape you? Who in your household does the cooking and why? What has influenced decisions around what food you choose to cook and serve? In what ways is your personal history reflected in food and in food preparation? In what ways have larger historical or cultural forces influenced what you cook in your home? What we discovered and what we share here is that our kitchens hold a lot more than food. Our hopes for this book. You are going to see the word hope frequently throughout this book. Hope, we believe, is an important element of justice. Hope is the ability to imagine a better world, one where wrongs are made right, where those bent low by the world are lifted up, and where everyone has what they need to not only live but thrive. When we talk about hope, we're not talking about a naive wishing that ignores the problems of the world. We are talking about a resiliency that gets us out of bed in the morning despite the world's challenges. Each chapter ends with someone we've introduced giving a glimpse of what gives them hope. May their reflections give you a moment to ponder where you find hope as well. In the final chapter, the two of us will share what gives us hope personally, but we start here with our hopes for this book. We hope it will live in your kitchen alongside your cookbooks. We hope it will be a resource you reference both for the practical tips and recipes and as you revisit the reflections when your own kitchen feels far from ideal. For some of you, this book will reinforce the good work you've begun and offer encouragement to go the next few steps. For others of you, we hope this book improves your relationship with your kitchen. For still others, we hope this book will be the catalyst to start that relationship. We hope this book influences your feelings about food and its power to connect us. We hope we can all begin seeing our kitchens as sacred places where important things happen, and not just as another room where menial tasks are performed. Finally, we hope you'll recognize that it doesn't take a lot to make a just kitchen. It requires willingness to see your place in an interconnected world, intention to do your part even if all you can do is something small, and deep belief that when many of us do what we can, where we can, as often as we can, we will in fact help heal our world. One final note. Our drive for just kitchens is deeply rooted in our faith. We're both grounded in the Christian tradition, which is something of a native tongue for us. That said, just kitchens don't have to be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or representative of any faith tradition. Just kitchens can be in homes of any faith or no faith at all. At times in this book, we use specifically Christian language, but we do so to illustrate truths that we believe are also universal. We invite you to consider how those ideas translate for you. Chapter 1. The Kitchen as a Keeper of Story and History. There's something about the kitchen that both draws us in and repels us. Many people, including us, consider the kitchen the center of their home. When people visit, we find they tend to congregate there. When someone is cooking, all the kids and adults gather. Even the pets can be found underfoot. The kitchen is often called the heart of the home. There is a magnetic force about the kitchen that draws everyone in. In contrast, we noticed throughout our interviews that guest after guest, when asked about their experiences in their kitchen, quickly wandered to the thoughts about the dining table or fast-forwarded to the eating of the meal. As we read through the interview transcripts, we repeatedly found ourselves nudging guests to return to the process of food preparation and such lines as, "Interesting. Now, can I draw you back into the kitchen for this question?" Or, "I love how you describe being at the table, but can you tell us about how that shows up in the kitchen?" After we kept experiencing the narrative of avoiding the kitchen, we wondered and asked why this was so common. Why is it easier to talk about the presentation and eating of a meal than the preparation of it? Why does the idea of sourcing ingredients and making family recipes bring excitement to people's voices, but the actual chopping and stirring calls forth resistance? There's no one answer to these questions, but food preparation is the most practical and time-consuming part of the process, so we believe it's important to learn from the tensions we hold to see what we can discover. We feel these tensions too, and as we began unpacking our own resistance to the kitchen, a floodgate of stories and feelings opened up in us. We explored these stories as we cooked, and in the act of cooking with intention, with an eye toward justice, we found the hope to forge a new way of being in our kitchens as they were transformed into more just and faithful spaces. A History of Power. Along with these stories of joyful gatherings with families and friends in the kitchen, there are other kitchen stories that are fraught. In much of Western history, and in our own stories, cooking involves an undeniable power dynamic. Whether that is women being expected to cook for men or enslaved people cooking for their enslavers, there has been a long history of cooking as the role of subservient ones. While that power dynamic may not be as pronounced in the modern kitchen as it was in the past, we still feel its influence. According to a 2019 Pew Research study, women remain the primary shoppers and cooks in the average household, even when both partners work. In homes where one partner works outside the home and the other does not, Even if that one works for pay from home, the seeming expectation is that one at home should cook for the one who goes off to work. The power dynamic is also reflected in who we see working in restaurant, hotel, school, and other kitchens across our country. It's often work left for people of color, recent or undocumented immigrants, and others we generally term unskilled. Anthony Bourdain gives a commencement speech in the conclusion of his classic memoir, Kitchen Confidential, Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. In it, he tells would-be chefs, much of the workforce in the industry you are about to enter is Spanish-speaking. The very backbone of the industry, whether you like it or not, is inexpensive Mexican, Dominican, Salvadorian, and Ecuadorian labor, most of whom could cook you under the table without breaking a sweat. Acknowledging this historical power dynamic may be the beginning of rethinking the ways we tend to one another and of changing our perception of cooking from a menial task to a loving act of service, not just in our kitchens, but in all kitchens in our cultures. It can be the beginning of turning meal preparation from a chore to a ritual, from an obligation to an offering. As we recognize that the kitchen has long been a place of bondage, we can begin to reimagine it as a place of liberation and justice. Though the kitchen has often been a place where people work mechanically, it holds potential to be a place where people move creatively. In many ways, the first call to a just kitchen is the call to decolonize the idea of what the kitchen is. When we reimagine the kitchen as less a place where subordinates are relegated and more a place where equals share mutuality, we bring ourselves and others into just kitchens. The just kitchen begins with de-emphasizing expediency and efficiency and shifting to something very different, savoring the time to reflect, heal, and be transformed. Ideal versus real. In our homes, we often meet pressure and expectations to feed our families, but to do so in a way that is ethically and environmentally sound, well-balanced, and nutritious. We believe that so much of what we explore in this book, such as how we source our food and cook with intention, can both be an inspiration and a burden. For us, sometimes preparing food is one more thing we're failing at 3 times a day. Can you relate? In our conversations, we heard even more, the shared experience of not having enough time to cook or enough time to cook in the way we'd like, and all the shoulds and expectations. If we only managed our time better, we'd have time to cook. There were also stories of not having the financial resources to cook as we'd like. We met the reality of living in the late-stage capitalism that Emily and Amelia Nagoski describe in their book, Burnout, Solve Your Stress Cycle, the sense that the system is rigged. It's actually not possible for a 2-person, 2-job household, let alone a 1-parent one, to work, run the household, potentially take care of children, and cook 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, in the way we'd like to cook. Because, at the end of the day, cooking is about time and labor. Many of us have an idealized history of kitchens. We might picture the 1950s Leave It to Beaver kitchen. What do we find there? One of the adults, the female, of course, with cooking and cleaning as her main role. That's how she spent her days. Or in many middle and upper income households, resources were available to hire people, usually people of color and people of lesser economic means, to do the cooking and cleaning. Rewinding further back through history brings to mind other idealized meals we've envisioned. From the pioneer farmers' Sunday dinners with tables laden with dishes the women worked on all day, to the feasts depicted on plantations and estates. All of these scenes have some kind of labor behind them, whether it was the toil of the women of the family, the hired help, or enslaved people. For a household kitchen to produce 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, it took people, often quite a few people, who were primarily dedicated to cooking. And multiple people primarily dedicated to cooking is not the reality most of us live in. No wonder we avoid the kitchen. It's loaded with a history of oppressive labor and with expectations of how it could be or should be, without the resources, personnel, and energy to fulfill that vision. Before we go any further, We want to explicitly echo the words, "The system is rigged." We can't actually do it all and have it all the time. It is unreasonable to think that every meal we can eat can be made with the level of intention and care we would like. It's unreasonable to believe we all can and will source everything we eat in the ethically and environmentally sustainable way we might want. Even as we decry the plastic food wrappings in our trash can and, yet again, put rotten produce into the compost, telling ourselves, "At least we compost." The truth is, having a just kitchen is a high ideal and not always perfectly possible. But there is hope. The kind of hope that doesn't ignore the difficult things, but that looks them in the eye and moves toward transformation and liberation. We believe the kitchen truly can be a place of transformation and liberation, of celebration and healing, of reflection and community, a place of hope. In the faith tradition of which we're both a part, one of our central sacraments is a meal. Some in the Christian tradition call it communion. Others, Eucharist, from the Greek meaning thanksgiving, and others, the Lord's Supper. Whatever it is called, it rises from a time when Jesus gathered with a motley crew of followers and friends to share a meal together. At this meal, the night before he was crucified, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, and told his followers that eating that bread was an act of remembrance. Later on during the meal, he took a cup of wine, blessed it, and shared it, proclaiming that it was to be imbibed in remembrance of him. This sacrament, so central to many, is simply coming around a table and eating together. As we might say to a podcast guest, "I see we went straight to the table. Can we draw our focus back to the preparation?" Yes, to those who sourced the elements and set the table, but also to that which comes before the sacred meal in many traditions' liturgies. The review of conscience, what some call the confession, a time to ponder the habits and thoughts that separate us from our ground of faith and one another. This time before the sacred meal allows us to reflect on what blocks us from the ever-present and life-giving love of the divine and the reciprocal love we're called to have for one another. We mention this because, as with communion, while your typical meal at home includes preparation, cutting, heating, stirring, the time before the meal might also be an invitation to ponder, what separates us from the ground of all being, from our community, our neighbors? What is separating us from feeling we are fully beloved children of God? Yes, we ask such questions during religious services before partaking of a shared sacred meal, but what if we asked ourselves, as the soup's reheating, how do our interactions in the kitchen and our stories around the kitchen separate us from one another? In what ways are our kitchens not just? Because at their core, the unjust power dynamics we've described are about separation from one another. Asking ourselves how we participate in that separation is a good initial step. As we grow into community and justice, we want to explore these questions with you and talk about what makes for a just kitchen. But before we do that, it might be helpful for you to get to know our geographies as authors, specifically those geographies that relate directly to the kitchen and the way it has shaped our view of the world. Throughout this book, you'll find similar sidebars. We hope these will make ideas for a just kitchen personal and specific, to help you see how your own story affects your kitchen and table as well.
My Evolving Kitchen. Anna's Story. I was around 8 years old, sitting on the threadbare couch in the living room of our partially finished small wooden house in Northwest Washington. Looking across toward the kitchen stove, I saw my mom standing there stirring. One younger sibling was setting up wooden train tracks around the kitchen table legs. Another, just proficient at crawling, traversed the floor, often getting under my mom's feet as she cooked. Occasionally, a pan lid clanked more loudly than necessary, as a frustration and exhaustion I didn't understand at the time boiled in my mother. By the time dinner was on the table, her mood was often marked by weariness. The fact that most every night of my childhood there was a full and well-balanced, healthy, and often locally sourced meal on the table for our large family by 6:30 p.m. is not the texture of the memory, though it's now something I deeply appreciate and honor. Instead, it's the tired look in my mother's eyes, my father's attempt to make dinner-time conversation, and the sense that mealtimes were supposed to be something more joyful than they often were. It wasn't until I left home for college and started spending time in other kitchens that I could articulate and reflect on the tension I felt between whether the kitchen was a place of joy and warmth or a place of depletion and exhaustion. While living with a family in Colorado during an internship in college, I experienced the kitchen as a more consistently life-giving place. And in this case, it wasn't the mother of the family doing the cooking either. Dave is a fantastic cook, and it seemed to bring him joy to look through the fridge when he got home from work and start chopping and putting things together. I quickly found that the kitchen table was the place to be in this house, with 2 little kids running around, grown-ups chatting, and good food being made. My childhood assumptions about whose responsibility it was to feed the family were broken wide open. It turns out that the person who loves cooking and is good at it should be the one who cooks, rather than traditional gender roles dictating that. I began to reimagine what the kitchen could be in my life and the lives of others.
Food and Identity. Derrick's story. When you are young, food is food. It never would have crossed my mind as a kid to think of black foods and white foods, but as I got older and got to peek into more of my suburban white friends' kitchens, it slowly dawned on me that what was happening in the kitchens of my youth was the preparation of black food. Along with that realization came questions about the value of what was happening in my kitchen. Internalized racism asks, if white people aren't doing it, does that make it inferior? Such questions didn't linger because what was coming out of the black kitchens of my younger days was delicious. Though I ceased questioning the merit of the food itself, I was left with the observation that what was happening in our kitchen was a part of who we are, and that had value. Over time, our family's kitchen would become more white. Maybe a better way of saying that is that our kitchen became more middle-class American, more frozen things, more prepackaged things, more instant things. As time in the kitchen became more of a luxury for everyone in the house, convenience took precedence over culture. The causality of this convenience was the loss of generational memory of what happens in black kitchens. At some point, we lost sight of the kitchen as a place to preserve our culture. This, it seems, happens to a lot of us, regardless of race. Though both my brother and I experimented and treasured our foods, our attempts to make fried chicken like our moms ended in grease fires. We wouldn't have named it as such, but those failures were an attempt at keeping something of our past alive. I'm just now learning what to do with collard greens, thanks to the volumes on black cooking. I insist on growing them every year, for the ancestors. My early 20s were a blur of fast food. My late 20s and early 30s, though, were a time of slowly reintroducing myself to the kitchen space. I imagined myself a large event chef, using as many pots and pans as possible to create elaborate meals, at least by my standards. That's also when I began to love cooking shows. And let's not forget the grill. I was 30 when I got my first grill. Grilling is an oddly gendered activity, an acceptable way to cook and still be manly. Though I've become suspicious of the gender dynamics that exist around cooking over fire, I still love grilling. And while the grill is outside, I consider it an extension of the kitchen. Over the last decade, my cooking has been paired with an increased love of gardening, which has included an appreciation for African American contributions to the agriculture of this country. My interests now are around what cooking says about the people and cultures represented in the kitchen. I love shows like Chef's Table and Ugly Delicious and anything with the late Anthony Bourdain. Cooking has become for me a way of getting to know people, their history, and their values. This includes my own heritage. Some foods represent struggle and oppression. Others represent resilience and ingenuity. Still others represent celebration and victory. And you can have all of those experiences represented on one plate. What do you bring to your kitchen? The first kitchen counter I remember is blank, color and material, in my blank, whose home, blank, person is blank, action there, hands, blank, action of hands, and blank, sound or words, coming from blank, pronoun lips. Our home was on the land of blank, tree, plant, and blank, animal, blank, geographic description, surrounded by blank, geographic description. I remember the blank, ingredient, and blank, ingredient, blank, cooking action, together to make blank, dish. The smell of blank, food, mixing with blank, another food smell, filling the room. My blank, important person in your life, cooked blank, dish, with blank, action, and blank, value. Sometimes I was invited to blank, an action in the kitchen, and other times I blank, another action in the kitchen, and I always knew blank, how it felt to be in that kitchen. As I grew, I discovered that kitchens could also be blank, description of other kitchens you experienced, and blank, another description. And I found blank, feeling, in creating places of blank, descriptor, and blank, descriptor. Today in my kitchen you'll find blank, kitchen equipment, on blank, material of kitchen counter, with blank, kitchen equipment standing by, blank, ingredient, and blank, ingredient, blank, action done to food, to make blank, dish, blank, sound, mingle with blank, smell, as blank, meal is made. While some days my kitchen is blank, description, there is always hope for blank, description. As I long to be part of creating a more blank, value, and blank, value world.
What do you bring to your kitchen? Anna. The first kitchen counter I remember is warm oak wood in my parents' home. My mother is cooking there, hands kneading the vat of bread dough, and singing coming from her lips. Our home was on the land of Douglas fir trees and bald eagles, a small island surrounded by the Puget Sound. I remember the fresh garden lettuce and carrots chopped together to make a salad, the smell of sweet potatoes mixing with roast beef filling the room. My grandmother cooked applesauce cake with efficiency and consistency. Sometimes I was invited to stir the soup, and other times I would make the whole meal. And I always knew I had a place in the kitchen. As I grew, I discovered that kitchens could also be fun and peaceful, and I found joy in creating places of welcome and warmth. Today, in my kitchen, you'll find the KitchenAid mixer on the granite countertop with my favorite wooden spoon from my time in Ghana standing by. Sausage and cabbages sautéing is something I treasure in our kitchen, with bubbles and squeaks you can hear. The sizzling mingles with the smell of caraway and dill as our Christmas Eve meal is made. While some days my kitchen is a place I barely run through on the way out the door, there is always hope for peace and presence as I long to be part of creating a more just and generous world.
What do you bring to your kitchen? Derrick. The first kitchen counter I remember is white laminate in my grandparents' home. My grandfather was cooking there, hands stirring and jokes coming from his lips. Our home was on the land with a walnut tree and all kinds of birds, in an urban neighborhood, surrounded by other homes and near the local playground. I remember the bread and cheese melting together to make grilled cheese sandwiches, the smell of chicken mixing with greens filling the room. My mother cooked.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?